Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, guys. So I got a question here from a friend that I'm going to read to you and just wanted to share my thoughts. So my friend says, I wanted to know if you've come across anyone using Allah's challenge to make a book, chapter, or surah like the Quran as an example of a falsifiable way to prove God's existence. Heard someone propose this briefly and thought I'd find out if this line of reasoning has been used in debates with atheists. Basically, using the miraculous nature of the Quran to prove God's existence on the terms of an atheist, i.e., falsifiable evidence. Also, what are your thoughts on this? Okay, so generally, the way that Muslims have approached the question of God's existence is by providing independent, rational evidence for the existence of God. And then they bring in the Quran for the purpose of proving the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Once you have someone who already believes in God, okay, once you've already brought them to that stage, or let's say they're a Christian, they already believe in God and in a monotheistic God. So with a Christian, you might start off by discussing the Trinity. So that's the way they approach it. And the reason why has to do with this. If you're trying to go to the Quran and the life of the Prophet, etc., directly, then what's happening is you're making an inductive argument for the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the prior probability in the atheist's mind that what you're presenting is going to be false is much higher than if you've already brought him to believe in basic theism. Okay? So the prior probability of something is the probability you assign to the likelihood of something kind of prior to seeing the evidence, and it biases basically how much evidence you would require in order to be pushed over the edge. Okay, so this is actually a normal function of human reasoning, and it's actually very rational. So for example, if right now I came to you and said, oh, Bob has been murdered, okay, and I'm like, and so now we're discussing, okay, who's the suspect? And I mentioned one of the suspects is your brother. Now, you know your brother really well. No, your brother would never do something like this, right? Doesn't make any sense. So before even looking at the evidence, you have a prior probability saying that your brother probably didn't do this, okay? And you would need a lot of evidence for you to be convinced that someone that you know so well and you know their character so well that they actually did this murder. Versus, imagine you know your brother and you know he's actually a terrible human being. He has like a really bad temper, and someone tells you, "Yeah, we think your brother is one of the suspects in the Bob murder case." You might be like, "Yeah, actually, I really believe that." Like you might because you know your brother so well and you know he has anger problems or he's such a terrible person or whatever, and you've experienced that intimately. You have no trouble at all believing that he's probably the guy that killed Bob. Now you're still going to need evidence either way. Okay, but in the one case your prior probability is like you're really skeptical. In the other case your prior probability is like, yeah, I could see that happening. Okay, and so the amount of evidence that's going to be required in order to push you over the edge from speculation into certainty is going to differ. Okay, so the same thing with the atheist. The atheist is coming with a materialistic worldview in which he believes in a kind of evolution, not just in terms of evolutionary biology, like evolving from a first cell, but I mean the evolution of human history. That religion is something that evolves over time, that institutions and civilization and whatever, all of this evolves over time. And that in the past they believed in these superstitions. And now we have, through the light of science, we have discovered, like I'm talking about scientific atheists, not the more sophisticated, like Nietzschean kind of atheists. They have this entire story in their head about the way human history works and what the time period of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was like. And that religion is superstition, that none of these claims can be justified, etc. So when you're making an inductive argument to such a person who already has core beliefs that they believe are very well substantiated, and you're not addressing them first, then what happens is you're already stepping into an arena in which they're going to be highly skeptical, and that skepticism is actually justified on the basis of their worldview, on the basis of their prior commitments, on the basis of the things that they think are true. Okay. So you can think of your beliefs as kind of like a web. There's like, or a network with interconnecting nodes. And so when you have core beliefs that are very strong, you require very, very strong evidence in order to alter those. Okay. So any evidence you're giving to that person is going to be interpreted from within their matrix, within their network and node. Where does your new piece of information fit in with that? Okay. So this is in general. Okay. In general. Now, that's not to say that this can't be done. You can prove to an atheist not only the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad, by doing so, prove the very existence of God. One way to do this is through, for example, certain of the scientific miracles, for example, in the Quran, knowledge that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam could not have previously known, or his prophecies about the end times, for example. This is one way to do it. Okay. Now, there's a lot of discussion that needs to be had, and I will need to do a full series on scientific miracles within the Quran, because there are now a number of people who have come out and said, no, we don't agree with this. There is no such thing as scientific. I'm talking about Muslims. There are no such thing as scientific miracles in the Quran. You can't use this. They try to do like a Kuhnian deconstruction of science to say that basically it only ever gives you, provincial or what's the word I'm looking for? There's a word I forgot, but basically contingent knowledge, knowledge, not absolute knowledge. And so therefore it can never be used as a basis. They say things like this, and this I have a point of view on that will need to be discussed further. So we'll just shelf that for now. The specific miracle that you're asking about is the Quranic challenge about, producing a book or a chapter or surah like it. Okay. One other thing I need to mention is this. With inductive arguments, okay, the more lines of evidence pointing in one direction, the stronger independent lines of evidence pointing in one direction, and lines of evidence in general, but when they're independent, it becomes even stronger. The more that those are pointing in that same direction, the stronger your inductive inference is going to be. So again, the murder example, okay? When I say, okay, what is the evidence that Bob, your brother is the one who killed Bob? If I tell you, okay, well, we found the murder weapon, like that, we found a knife that belongs to your brother, and that was the murder weapon, okay? Well, that's pretty good evidence, but hey, maybe somebody took the knife from your brother and then killed Bob. So it's not something that's, the evidence that ends all discussion. But if we say, okay, and we know your brother lied about his alibi and actually he was in the same vicinity as Bob. Okay, now we have two pieces of evidence pointing in the same direction. So now we're starting to get that creeping suspicion. Wait, maybe he did do it. Okay, it's getting stronger and stronger. Then we say we found some of your brother's blood in the car that was used to transport the body. Okay, that's a third piece of evidence. Okay, so the more evidence that you're getting, pointing in that same direction, the more you're starting to think, okay, your brother was somehow involved in this, right? Did he commit the murder? Was he an accomplice? Whatever. There's a lot more going on. Okay. Likewise, when it comes to the Quran, if you are trying to prove that the Quran is the word of Allah, that the truth of the Prophet Muhammad, what you want to do is you want to get as many lines of evidence as possible pointing in that same direction. Okay. Now, one of those, okay, is this falsifiability claim, okay, or falsifiability challenge that the Quran puts out. That is one piece of evidence, but generally it's not going to be a piece of evidence that is convincing to an atheist living in the 21st century. And I'm going to tell you why. This challenge was originally put out to the Arabs of the 7th century, whose entire civilization, okay, their art, their skill, their genius was in al-bayan, as al-balagha, rhetoric, not just rhetoric, but getting meaning across, beautiful speech, skilled speech. They were extremely skilled. Their language is extremely complex. It's extremely beautiful. It's filled with meaning. And they were masters at it, at using it for the most maximum effect. Now, this is something that a 21st, like, I'm going to give you an experience. Like, every native Arabic speaker, I'm talking not ones who were raised here, I'm talking about proper Arabs who were raised in the school system there and they understand like poetry. Almost all of them, virtually, you'd very rarely find a person in the Arab world who has not heard a piece of poetry so powerful that it brought them to tears. Okay? Most of them have had this experience multiple times in their life. Now, if you ask the average person in the West, when was the last time you've heard a piece of poetry that brought you to tears? The answer is likely never. Okay? Most people in the West have never had this experience. They don't know the power of words. The closest thing they have is maybe music. Okay? But music, it uses sounds to basically generate your emotions. It's not purely the words that are spoken, the power of the words, the power of the meaning, the strength of how it was said, and the things like that. So the English speaking modern day atheist is just he doesn't understand. First of all, the challenge is not exactly put to him. Okay, it's put to the Arabs who were so the Arabs, when this challenge was put to them, first of all, they understood the power of the Quran. It's for that reason that the Quran sometimes mentions that people literally do sujood, or that they should be doing sujood, just at the mere recitation of the Quran. And in fact, historically, that did happen. Some of the people who met the Prophet, when they heard the Quran, literally fell into prostration from how powerful it was. So for them, they understand the challenge. They're the people of the challenge, and they understand the power of the Quran, and they understand their inability to meet it, and that is what kind of forces them to that's why that's where the power of the challenge comes from. It's something felt existentially. It's not something that they're mentally calculating. Something's felt existentially because they understand it. Okay. Now come to the modern day atheist living today, who speaks English, doesn't know Arabic, etc. That challenge is not felt existentially for him. Okay, he doesn't even understand. He can't even begin to comprehend the power of speech, because, quite frankly, the English of today, maybe it was different in Shakespeare's day, but the English of today is very rarely moving. Okay, its efficacy. Only the Brits, I feel like, still have some of that in them, where they're able to very effectively marshal. Use words in a way that really affects people in the soul, but generally it's very weak. Okay, it's very weak. So they don't understand that. They don't speak Arabic. They can't directly feel the power of the Quran. They cannot compare it with Arabic poetry. So for them, they can mentally understand that nobody was able to meet this challenge just as a historical fact. Okay, so that's now a mental, like, istidlal. That's now a mental calculation, or a mental inference that's being made, not something felt existentially. And generally, it's just going to be a weaker inference because they do not have the frame of reference to understand the significance of this. They say things like, oh, well, nobody could replicate Shakespeare either. Okay? This is what they're doing. They compare it to, like, Shakespeare, okay? And they totally miss the point, okay? So what I feel like is that this point can be mentioned to atheists, but it's going to be, it's still an evidence which points in the direction, meaning it makes it more like, if you take like the probability that Islam is true or false, it's something that moves you more towards probably true. Okay, even if it's very, very slight. Okay, on its own, I don't think it's going to be effective. In tandem with many, many other proofs and evidences, and them getting to know the character of the Prophet and understanding on a deep level the kind of person he was, the spirituality that he exuded, the social reforms that he made, etc. When they get to know that, okay, then it's something that adds up because it's giving you multiple lines of evidence. Okay, so you add this plus scientific miracles plus the character of the Prophet plus for example, the comprehensive nature of the Sharia as well. And you start to add up all of these different lines of evidence, then you kind of can push to a conclusion. However, as I said in the beginning, generally this is going to be easier if somebody is already believing in God. Okay. Now, the reason why I believe that's the place to start is because it's much easier to prove the existence of God than it is to give an inductive argument for the prophethood of a prophet to somebody who's already inculcated in a materialistic worldview, in a scientific, rationalistic, reductionist, physicalist worldview, to make an inductive argument to them, because they will always try and find a way to reduce things to matter. Okay. So this is why it's easier to start with the existence of God. The existence of God has qat'i rational evidences, undeniable rational evidences. The contingency argument is an undeniable rational proof, in my opinion, that leads one to the ultimate origin. Okay. So why would you abandon something like the contingency argument to go for something that is not as rationally certain? That doesn't make sense to me. Okay. Now, with some people it might work. I think the character of the prophet is something that needs to be brought up because that affects the heart. Okay, and that can open the mind. But if we're talking strictly in terms of the mind, if you're going to be talking to an atheist and you're trying to convince them that God exists, you need to be going for the contingency argument. You need to be making design inferences, etc. That's the way to go. So those are my thoughts. Inshallah, let me know what you guys think. Yeah, and I think that's it. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. It does help with the algorithm and all that. And if you benefited, inshallah, feel free to share. And assalamu alaikum.